Hello, dear friends. How are you all doing? If you're new here, my name is August. This is Cozy Rosy Reads, where we talk about thrifted books, underrated books, all the literature, and I'm so excited that this is actually the first full year of me being on booktube, so it is time for me to do a year in review. This will be my first one. I found these questions online, and I think the original creator was dominish.books. I don't know if that's a booktuber or a bookstagrammer. So I'm really excited. I'm going to be answering all these questions for a year-end review. I have so many books to talk about, but before that, I do want to give a shout out to my overflowing TBR shelf here. Like, I have been spoiled rotten by the holidays and by friends and family who have gifted me some amazing books that I just do not even have room for. So I have so many books just surrounding me at all times that I'm really geeked out to read, and I'm just feeling really grateful and happy, and I really hope you're all doing well. And I'm really excited to talk even more in depth about the wonderful books that I've read this year, maybe some disappointments, all that fun stuff. In all, I just hope that this inspires you to maybe pick up a book that you haven't heard of, because all of these, I feel like, I didn't hear about them until I thrifted. I just went thrifting and I randomly picked up books and I was like, oh my god, this book is amazing. So let's go ahead and take a trip down memory lane. My first full year of being on booktube, which I'm just so incredibly grateful for. One, I can't believe that I get to do this. I get to talk about books and my passion for books and my love of reading, and then that you all care and want to hear more and are excited for me too about all the books that we read and talk about, and that so many of you are here. It just blows my mind. Like, I can't understand it, can't quite fathom it. So let me put my coffee away and we'll go ahead and hop right into these questions. So the first question, of course, has to be, what has been my favorite book so far of the year? If you've been here for a while, then this might come as like no surprise whatsoever, but my favorite book of the year so far, because it's not quite the end of the year and I'm actually reading a very incredible book right now, so that could easily take a top tier, but I'm pretty sure it is Snow by Betsy Howie. This is a super tiny little book that I found while at an antique bookstore. It was just sitting on the ground. I feel like I've talked about this one any chance that I can at this channel. Like, this book has changed my life. I'm still designing mentally like tattoos that will embody this book, but it's so hard to do that. This is a story, a short little story that is incredibly underrated. More people should read it, but I don't know how many copies there are in the world because it is so small. It came out in the 80s, was published in the 80s. Fun fact, my dad actually went to high school with this person, so he actually knows her, the author. I don't know if she's written anything else, but one of my favorite books. Winston just knows when I'm filming. He's been sleeping all day. You've been sleeping all day. Oh, there's a big boy. He got a new sweater yesterday. It's not Christmas anymore, but you can still wear pine trees, right? Looks like Winston's gonna be sitting with us. So this follows an unnamed female character and narrator. She has recently gone through a divorce, and she is living in New York City and decides to pack everything up and kind of go on like a little solo vacation into this very snowy cabin. When she's there, so she does bring her cats with her. When she gets there, she gets completely snowed in by this horrible snowstorm, and either by delusion or grief or magical realism, her cats start talking to her, and they embody parts of herself. So everything in here, there are other animals in here that are anthropomorphized. Is that the right conjugation for that? What is happening with my necklace? Has it been like this the whole video? Why didn't you all tell me? Oh, that's gonna drive me bonkers. Okay. These animals start talking to her, but they all represent different emotional facets of herself. So through this of being snowed in and trying to get help and trying to go out into the snowstorm, she encounters a polar bear, which doesn't make sense because she is obviously not in the Arctic or wherever. So just things start happening. It's very magical realism, but it's all like this big fable of learning to love yourself. And at the very end, there's this like huge cast of characters that come to the cabin, but they're all facets of herself or people that she's embodied. It's almost like reincarnation mixed with magical realism and folklore and fable and myth, and like it is so well done and it made me cry. It's just, this book honestly could have just been a mirror for me. It's something that I needed to read at the right time and something that I think about all the time. Since reading this book in January, I don't think I've stopped thinking about it. I'm a little nervous to reread it and afraid that it won't hit me the same, but I feel like it will, and I'm still just dreaming up all of these tattoo ideas because this really hit home. There were so many lines in here that just struck a really big chord, and I think it's just so, again, emotional, but the magical realism was just spot on for me. This is the exact type of book I love, where it's just bizarre and weird and quirky, but it really makes you think, not only in terms of the plot and what is really happening versus like a delusion or maybe mental illness, but it makes you reflect on your own life and your own personalities or emotions and look at them more with tenderness instead of frustration or anger or misunderstanding. 5 trillion million gold stars, my favorite book of the year, definitely one of my favorite books of all time. So I'm really lucky that I just randomly saw this on the ground of an old bookstore and took a chance on it. So, snow. Next question is favorite series that you started this year but have not finished, and that is easily The Girl from the Other Side manga series. This is the cutest, quaintest, most charming, most delicious, most delectable, cottagecore, comforting manga I've ever read, but it's also really dark and sinister and eerie, and it's just everything that I love in literature and atmosphere, specifically atmosphere with this book. I was graciously given the whole series for Christmas in physical format. So when I started this book, I read it over on my Kindle, so I was reading the manga just like on my Kindle, which was fine, but I knew that this is a series that like I would actually devour and want to reread over and over and over again. I am currently missing book 4. It's been back ordered, so very excited to keep reading this. Basically, this follows a young little girl here named Shiva who lives in this fantasy world where it's very divided. There are people who are plagued with this kind of disease shown by this guy here, which is Teacher. So she's a little too young to understand that the world is going through this chaos, but she just knows that this kind of creature named Teacher is taking care of her while her aunt is away. But we are already kind of alluded to the fact that her aunt is probably never going to come back. Either she died or she abandoned Shiva. But the Teacher is this like deer, antlered head, really tall, really skinny, has like almost like a serpent demon kind of tail, and he is trying to protect her at all times, but they live in this cute little cozy cottage and they chop wood and they bake bread and they just live this like very cozy domestic rustic lifestyle, but then he's also just trying to protect her from the world around them where there are people who are trying to kill him because he is quote unquote like a bad guy. So love this series, cannot wait to read it. I am waiting for book 4 to come because I did read books 1 and 2 on my Kindle, but once I get book 4 from the backlist and stuff, I am going to start all the way over, read the whole series in its entirety. I'm so excited. Next question is favorite series finished this year, and if you've been here, you probably know I'm not a series reader unless it is a manga series. I can't really get super attached to series. I don't know, I've started so many series this year, I can't even think about all of them. One was like Moon Chosen, which is a fantasy. I started Peculiar Children series, DNF'd that really fast, did not like the first book. I started the Annihilation series. Can't remember the name of the actual series, as you can tell, I'm just naming them. Jeff Vandermeer's series, I definitely think I could see myself continuing it, but I would only want to thrift the rest of the series, so I just have to keep my eye out on used books for that one. Yeah, I feel like there are some others, but none that are really like I need to stick with. So basically the answer is no. No, I did not finish any series this year, and I'm totally okay with that. Ooh, this next question's really hard for me. It's favorite new author discovered this year. So one of the wonderful things about thrifting is that you discover so many new authors that you've never heard of before, and you typically find books that are just like so much older. But the bad news is that because I typically thrift all my books, I hardly read multiple books by the same author. So I do have a stack here of just books that I have read this year that if I see a book at a thrift store by the same author, you know I'm gonna pick it up, or maybe I do already have some of their books on my TBR shelf that I found because I fell in love with them. So yeah, so far I don't really have any, I don't think I've read many books that are by the same author this year, if at all. I don't think I have, actually. Anyway, these are books that I would love to read more from their authors, and their writing style just amazed me. So we have Symmetries by Jeanette Winterson. I wasn't a really big fan of the plot, but the writing style is 1000% my style. It's very fragmented, very vague, very confusing, so lyrical, so poetic, so beautiful. Love the writing style. I have Sexing the Cherry on my TBR here by Jeanette Winterson, so I'm really excited to read more by her. Just in love with the writing style. Like, could definitely be my new favorite author. I just really need to read more from her backlist. This is a book that I haven't had a chance to talk about at all on this channel because I have yet to do a November wrap-up, so stay tuned. I think I might in January do like a November-December wrap-up in the same video, but that is Dreamside by Joyce. Holy shit, I loved this book. The writing style was really accessible. The plot was amazing. Very metaphysical, metaphorical, magical realism, psychology, dynamic characters, dark academia, fantastic. This was a 5-star read. I really loved it, and I do have another book by Joyce on my shelves, which is The Tooth Fairy. He just has a way of taking something that's like a fable, or maybe something that we've grown up hearing about. Winston is screaming for some reason if you hear him in the background. Taking something that is maybe very ubiquitous in our culture and society, but then turning it really dark and doing a deep dive into it and the psychology behind it. So I'm really excited to read Tooth Fairy. Amazing fiction author. I definitely would like to read more. I know nothing about this author though. I just found both of these books at Goodwill. Winston, I don't know what was in his water this morning, but he sounds so crabby right now. Another one is Creatures by Crissy Van Meter. This was a huge 5-star prediction for me, and it did not fail. I would love to read more by Crissy Van Meter, but honestly, I haven't even looked into her backlist or kept an eye on if she has any new releases. I don't even know when this one was published, honestly. I think it's like 2019, 2020. So I loved this. I adored it. I loved the plot and the writing style and just the poeticness mixed with like just really good accessible storytelling. Loved it. So emotional, made me tear up. Really would love to read more by this author. Next we have Helen Oyeyemi. I read White is for Witching earlier this year, fell in love with the writing style. So dark, again, very cryptic and vague, just so eerie, so beautiful, tackles a lot of topics underneath the surface. So like racism, sexism, classism, all within a haunting ghost story or like a haunted house. Absolutely loved it. And I was gifted Mr. Fox, one of her older books. I think this one came out in like 2010, 2011. I am so excited to read more by Helen Oyeyemi. Basically every book that I see by this author, I am like, I want to buy it right now, especially in stores, but I just have held myself back from doing that. I just don't typically buy a whole lot of brand new books. So I'm really excited to read more. I really want to read Gingerbread, another one of her books. So Helen Oyeyemi, I'm so excited to read more by this author. So excited. And lastly, this is the book that I'm currently reading, which could easily skyrocket into one of my favorite books of this year or even all time. And that is Lacrimore by SJ Costello. This came out this past year in 2020. Hardly anyone has read this book. It definitely seems, at least my copy is like an indie, very indie publisher. It's a very interesting format of a book if it's not self-published either. I honestly have no idea. Yeah, it's self-published, so fantastic, so gothic, beautiful descriptions. I have been annotating the actual crap out of this book and loving it. I want to read so much more by SJ Costello. I want to know everything. I'm really hoping this book doesn't disappoint me, but I am currently 75 pages way through and I'm freaking floored. I love it. I feel like you booktubies out there or bookish people who love gothic, dark, maybe even more classic kind of books, like this kind of reads almost like a classic, set in this fantastical world, but it doesn't have any magic or magic, I don't know, I'm not so familiar with the fantasy genre, like magic rules. Is that the thing? Like the rule system? I don't know. It's so good. So so good. So first I need to finish this book and then I can look into more by this author because holy shit, I love it. Okay, up next is favorite new character of the year, and I don't really get super emotionally attached to characters, but I'm gonna pick two from the same book, and that is gonna be Hiro and Yun from Spinning Tropics by Aska Mochizuki. Loved this book, found it used at my local indie bookstore, fell in love with it. I could find hardly anything about this author on Google. It was very frustrating. I don't know if they've written another book. I don't know anything about this author. Loved this book. This is a female-to-female romance set in Vietnam in the early 2000s. It is just about daily life and eating fruit and exploring sexuality at a time when same-sex romances were just still looked down upon. Fighting class systems, fighting poverty, the differences in classes, it's so well written, and Hiro and Yun are some of the most like tender, dynamic, complicated characters that I've read in such a long time, but they just felt so genuine and sweet, and their intentions were so altruistic. It like broke my heart when certain things happened in this book, and I loved it. This is like such a great summer read. I highly, highly recommend it if you can find a copy and you can get your hands on it. Also, this cover is just stunning. These two characters just like freaking broke my heart, and I loved it. Basically, you're just like a fly on the wall in their relationship and in their lives, and it's so tender. So tender. It's like biting, this book is like just biting into a peach that's maybe been like sitting out in the sun on a windowsill for a little bit. Gorgeous, stunning, soft, silky. Loved it. Okay, next is favorite new release of the year. And again, like I've said, thrifting does not often give us the access to brand new books. I do use Libby and Hoopla to listen to like brand new audiobooks, but I honestly don't know if I've read or listened to anything this year that came out in 2021 yet. I really don't think I have. I could be wrong, but I honestly just have no idea. I've read a few different things that came out in 2020, so I'm just gonna talk about those instead because honestly 2020 and 2021 just feel like the same year. I had to like go through my Goodreads and see exactly what books I read this year because I wanted to include books that apparently I read last year. So I'm gonna talk about The Swallowed Man by Edward Carey. This book, friends, is a retelling of Pinocchio, told from Geppetto's perspective as he is swallowed by the whale. He's living in the belly of the whale, writing by candlelight, this entire thing. And I listened to this as an audiobook and knew I wanted a physical copy because I just had the inkling that there would be mixed media in here, and I was right. I can't wait to reread this. The audiobook was a little too loud, boisterous, a little obnoxious. The author reads it out loud, which usually I love, but it was just a little too over dramatic. Very crazy voices and loud and very dramatic, and that was a little too much for this tiny little book. Loved it. Eerie, creepy, funny, like laugh out loud funny, dark, twisted, an amazing retelling. I don't feel like I read a whole lot of retellings, but this one took the freaking cake. So it came out in 2020. I think it deserves so much more hype if you're looking for a truly unique read and retelling and like a spin on something. It's dark, it's freaky. Here we go. If you like aquatic and like nautical vibes and sea shanties as I do, you need to read this book. You need to read it. So yeah, I finished the audiobook, and this is a book that I bought brand new because I was like, I want to reread this with my eyeballs instead of listening to it. So The Swallowed Man by Edward Carey. Oh boy, okay. Biggest surprise of the year. I had many surprises this year, most of them being bad, but I'm gonna take this question as like, I'm surprised I liked this book. And that is going to be Mangoes, Bananas, and Coconuts, A Cuban Love Story by Himilce Novas. I picked this up at Goodwill. I looked it up on Goodreads prior to reading it because I knew nothing about this book. By all accounts, based on the shitty reviews of this book, I should have hated this. I should have been offended, disgusted, hated it. There's incest, there's cannibalism, there is creepy sexuality, pedophilia, I should have hated it. Those are huge red flags for me, why I can never finish reading Lolita. I started it so many times, I just get so creeped out and grossed out, I just like can't do it. So there are certain trigger warnings that like I just know when going into a book if they're going to be talking about that, specifically like pedophilia, incest and sexual assault and stuff. I don't want to read it. I loved this. I loved this. I did a whole vlog on this one, so I'll link that down below. I feel like most of these books that I've been talking about have vlogs associated with them, but this one in particular, I'm going to link it because I talk about it way more in depth, and I am straight up telling you again, because I say that a lot in that vlog, I am not recommending this book to anybody. I, for some reason, loved the shit out of this book. I don't understand why. I think it's the writing style was so beautiful and poetic and lyrical, and it is written from a feminist satire perspective. It talks about a man who has been like touched by God, quote unquote, and he automatically just becomes so much more handsome and so much more attractive, and like it is so satirical, and there's a lot to do with like mental illness in here, magical realism that is definitely played up as like much more delusion or mental illness, but there is like magical realism things where butterflies follow this one girl around. Like there's just so many different references in here. It's horrifying and disgusting, but I loved it because it is through a lens of feminist satire. It was written in the 90s. I should not have liked it. I feel like that's the biggest thing I can say. Based on my freaking track record, I really should not have liked this book. But I loved it. I loved this book, and I don't like that it's hard for me to gush about it even more, I feel like, or to have a more in-depth conversation or discussion about it, because I just really would hate for this to be actually recommended to anybody. That's not what I'm trying to do at all. I just loved it. I don't understand why. I can psychoanalyze the shit out of my brain and this book. It really surprised me because, again, based on everything I know about myself and my reading taste and my habits, you know, there's pulls, there's pushes, there's pulls. And anyway, I was very surprised that I liked this book this much. It was a surprise. It wasn't on my TBRs at all. I just picked it up at Goodwill and then immediately started reading it, which is something I rarely do. Surprised me, floored me, wowed me. Again, not recommending it. Okay? Pinky promise, not recommending this book. Okay, another tricky one, my friends. Biggest disappointment of the year. If you have been here, you know what this is. Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. This by no means was a bad book. I don't think this is a bad book. I was just a little too excited, a little too overhyped. I feel like this book was overhyped for me on booktube and bookstagram, people talking about how they reread it multiple times like every year. It's their cozy comfort book, and I was like, oh my god, I'm in love. I love the movie adaptation so much. I was so excited to read this, and it fell so hard on its face for me. I was like, why do people like this book? I do not understand. If I had just like picked this up, you know, seeing the movie and then just picked this up without hearing people talk about how much they loved it, I might have enjoyed it, but I think it's because so many people were like, this is hands down my favorite book of all time. I don't know what it was. Like, it was just such a huge disappointment. I have read significantly worse books this year. This is, again, not a bad book. I think that there is some whimsy that could be found in it. I think if I lower my expectations and reread it, I might enjoy it, but it was a really big disappointment at the time. I was so frustrated. I was confused. I was angry. I went through a whole roller coaster of emotions with this book. I was like forcing myself to like it. It just wasn't happening. So I just had to reconcile with myself and just kind of like be like, girl, okay, we are not liking this book right now. It's okay to not like a book that's been super hyped to you. Even if you're like trying to force yourself to like it, or trying to read between the lines, trying to dissect it, figure out and pinpoint exactly what you can see other people liking in it. But for me, I just couldn't see the intrigue. I couldn't see the coziness. I couldn't feel the magical anything. So this was a huge disappointment for me, sadly. And lastly, my dear friends, we have one book that I read this year that I would recommend to anyone, and that was probably one of the most easy to answer of this like questionnaire, and that is The Truth About Awiti by C.P. Patrick. I found this while thrifting. I think it is criminally underrated. I think so many people need to read this book. I would recommend it to anyone, and I'm gonna say that very broadly. like just a blanket statement, but I think there are a lot of content warnings in here because it does follow the slave trade. It follows Black people being enslaved. It follows the horrible acts that are committed against them and to them sexually, violently, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. It is horrendous. If the camera angle just changed, it's because I had to get up real quick for a phone call, so I apologize, but truth about Awiti. Yeah, this one has a lot of content warnings, a lot of trigger warnings. I do think that it is a very important text, but it still should be gone into like very cautiously and maybe with some research as to what content warnings and trigger warnings there are. So this follows a young woman named Awiti. Slave raiders come into her village, take her family, and then she is given this very bizarre, almost kind of gift, quote unquote, of immortality by another person who was immortal and then passed it on to her. So with her anger and frustration at seeing her people and her family completely taken by these white slave raiders, she becomes this powerful entity who can live forever, and she just doesn't care if she gets hurt or anything. So she begins to kill slave masters and kill people who have wronged her, families who have slaves, plantation owners. She almost starts like militarizing enslaved Black people in order to bring justice for her family and for her people. So it is intense, and what makes it an especially unique read is that every single chapter is actually written from a different perspective. So for the first, like, I would say maybe 2 or 3 chapters, it is written from Awiti's perspective, or we're following just Awiti. But as it progresses, each chapter is written from a different place and a different time, so it will tell you the year. Like this one, for instance, is Goree Island, Africa, 1874, and it's written from somebody else's perspective. And C.P. Patrick, this author, does a phenomenal job of writing in that person's dialect or voice, or it's just amazing, so that you get a different perspective, but the one thread that keeps everything the same is that they encounter Awiti at some point. And you can just tell by the descriptions that these writers for each chapter give that you're like, oh, that's Awiti, that's our girl, coming to wreak vengeance on everyone who has participated in this racism. This is also like a mythic fable, like folklore about the origin of the tropical storms that typically hit the southern states of the US and the South, and the islands that participated in the slave trade, as it being Awiti. Awiti has gathered all of these restless, angry spirits who were victims of this horrific slave trade, and they culminate together into this big storm and create the hurricanes that then completely destroy these areas that were the most vile in the slave trade. And it's absolutely amazing. It's fascinating. It is so well written. It is diverse in terms of the different perspectives we get. It is so well done, friends. Cannot express enough how freaking well done this book is, and I do just want to recommend it for everyone, but again, just be cautious going into it because it is just very intense. So that is, Winston is screaming his head off. I don't understand why. He's been so calm for days, and as soon as I do an actual sit-down video, he's going nuts. So I apologize, friends. So yeah, that's the truth about Awiti. Amazing. So there we have it, friends. That is my year in review for 2021, my first full year of being on booktube and with Winston screaming in the background of almost every video I have. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed taking a trip down memory lane with me and seeing all of the wonderful eclectic reads that I've had this year. It has really been a very successful reading year. In terms of stats, which I have not put together at all, I have read the most books I've ever read this year. It is now well over 100 books, which is amazing. I feel very lucky and grateful to be surrounded by such wonderful literature, as you can tell, like surrounded by stories, and it makes me really, really happy. So thank you all so incredibly much for being here. I hope you're doing really well, and I will see you all again very soon for my next video. Stay cozy, my friends. Bye!